Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go to, we'll do like a lab version of today's class on classes and objects in Python. So we'll go to our trusty editor, Python Online Interpreter, right? It preloads Hello World. So we could run Hello World. All right, so here's what we're going to do. What we talked about in class today was how to create a class called person. So we'll create a class called person, CLASS, turns blue because it's a Python keyword, person, and we do a semicolon so it knows to indent. So the first function we want to write, really called a method. If it's a function and it's inside a class, it's called a method. So the first function we're going to write is underscore init underscore. Oh, we have to type in define, DEF, which is short for define when defining a function or method. And it always takes in, if you're going to operate on individual objects, which is storage created by this class, you need this self parameter. And then we're going to have two fields for a person. A person is going to have a name and a natural language. So I'm going to use parameters N and L. All right, so now I'm going to say, put a semicolon so it knows to indent. All right, good. I'm going to say self name equals N and self language equals L. So now what I could do is I'll do my main program. Pound is a comment. And I could say P1, person one equals person. Say Mary speaks English. Mary speaks English. Okay. And then what I can do is now I can print p1.name. Let's see what happens. We'll run this. And it prints Mary. Okay. So what this basically did was it created a person object. I called it P1. And I'm going to go into a little more detailed chat at the end of this lecture on when I call this function person. You might be wondering, where is this function person? You don't see it. It actually ends up calling this initialize function, which has the strange name, which we'll talk about shortly. Underscore init underscore. So I passed in a variable N and a variable L. The name was Mary, the language is English, and now I printed out information about Mary. Okay. Now down the road, we might not want people doing something like this. We don't want people to say P1's name is now, Jose. And then have people print P1's name. Do a cut and paste. So what I basically did is I created an object. I created a person and I called the person P1, gave a name of Mary and a language of English. Then I said, you know what, Mary's name's changed, it's Jose. So we may not want people doing this. We may want to protect these fields from being written to. So this protection mechanism can be put in place like this. I could take my variable name, which I'm really defining up here in the constructor, the initialization function, and I could put two underscores in front of it. And maybe I'll do the same for language. I don't want programmers in the main function to start altering my data. So now what I could do is, let me get rid of this. Let me put a comment here. Yeah, put a comment. and I could run my program. Now I run my program, all I did was I created a person called Mary, and I say Mary speaks English. Okay, if I go to print Mary now, and this line used to work before, now I'm going to get a problem saying there's no such attribute as the name attribute. Or even if I try to print underscore name, I think that's the name of the variable, it's not there. There's no attribute. So here's what really happened. By putting this underscore in front of the variable's name, the variable is actually there, but the application programmer, the person in the main part of that function, cannot access it directly. And we're putting this constraint in because we want to keep our data secure. However, our application programmer should be allowed to know what the person's name is. So what we'll do is this, we'll add a function that will return the person's name and allow the application programmer to use that function. So we'll call the function, something like get name. And get name operates on objects, so we'll have the parameter self come in, and we'll just say return self underscore name. Now a function get name is defined inside the class person. So this function has access to the storage, but the outside software developer does not, but the software developer can do this now. And say, take person1 and call the get name function and print what gets returned from it. So now I can call the get name function because it doesn't have the underscore in front of it. So underscore, it is accessible inside the class, but not accessible outside the class. So you could kind of think of this as public access, and this variable is now private access. Okay, so that's a good okay, so now let's do the same thing for getting the language. So we'll define a get language method, which also operates on individual objects. So we'll pass in the self parameter and colon, and we'll say return self dot underscore language. Okay, so now what I can do is I can start to create several people. Create 3 people. So I'll do I'll create Jose. Say Jose speaks Spanish. And then in class yesterday, we had Klaus. Who speaks German. Okay. Oh, give a different variable name, P3. So I'm going to make person 1, person 2, and person 3. Okay. So, and then I could, call individual functions on those people. All right. So now I could, if I wanted to, I could put these people into an array. So I can create an array called peeps. Let's say peeps, or for people. And I can say open bracket, P1, comma, P2, comma, P3. All right, so now I just took these three people that I created, put them into an array, and then I can say for P in peeps, what could I do? I could say name equals P dot get name language equals P dot get language. Function. Oh, and you may be wondering, why am I not passing in a parameter to fill in for self? When you give a reference to an object, that becomes the self. So that gets passed in automatically. So therefore, I don't have to list it because it will have to be there. So they don't make you list it. So what else can we do? And then I could say print plus do this. Okay, so this is now saying Mary speaks English, Jose speaks Spanish, and Klaus speaks German. All right, so now what have we done? Okay. Okay, so now wouldn't it be good if we could, all right, so far, let's make sure we understand this. A person has two attributes, a name, not a first name and a last name, just a name, and a language, a natural language that they speak. But wouldn't it be nice as we're creating people if we had a variable that tells me how many people we've created? Now, if Mary had a variable that says how many people were created, and Jose had a variable that said how many people were created, and Klaus had one, they could actually all have different values depending on who's setting them and who's using them. What we'd like to do is we'd like to have a variable that is shared for the entire class person, not particular to Mary or Jose or Klaus, just a variable for persons. And we'll do the underscore thing, say count, like the number of persons, and we can even initialize the variable to 0. Now, every time we create a person, this function runs, this init function runs every time we created one of these people. So the string Mary came into this parameter n and then got written to the name field. So every time we create a person, what we'll do is we will say underscore. Well, okay, so here's the thing. The variable count is not related to an individual object like Mary, English, and Jose, Spanish. It's related to the entire class. So it's not it doesn't have the self prefix, it has the person prefix. And then we'll say underscore count. And then we'd like to increment it by 1. So the way we will do that in Python has this strange plus equals 1. So that means underscore count equals underscore count plus 1. Okay, that's a Python thing. C++ and Java use count plus plus. It means add 1 to it. Okay. So every time we create, so it's initially, it's a variable shared by the person class, not an individual field. It's not like Mary has a name, a language, and a count, and then Jose has a name, a language, and Jose's personal count. They don't all have their own personal field called count. It's just a one count field shared by the whole class. So every time we create an object of type person, we increment the count. So now what we could do is we could say number of peeps equals person. So I'm not going to say like P1, P2, because that won't have access to that field, but it's person. Oh, so I made the field hidden, so I won't be able to access it. So I need to make a public method, a method where I could read the variable. So I'm going to define a public method called get count. Doesn't take in any parameter, it doesn't take in a self parameter because there's no object coming in. It's just a method for the class. So it actually has no parameters. And then I'm going to say return person underscore count, whatever that variable is. Okay, so now that I have this method, so a little discussion needed here. Get language is a method that operates on a particular object of type person. So if I want to know the language, I have to say, which person do you want to know the language of? Same is true for name. If I want to know somebody's name, I have to say which person. So I could say, you know, which person I call the get name function on. So I have a person and I call get name. Get me the name of that particular person. Get me Mary's name. Get me Klaus's name. But if I want the count variable, I'm not interested in Mary's count or Jose's count. I just want the count that goes with the entire person class. So this is saying go to the person class and get me the field called count. And I put the double underscore in front of it to keep it private because I don't want to create 3 persons and then have some program come in and say the count field is now equal to 100. I don't want to think I have 100 people when I only have 3 people. I don't want them changing it to some string like Jello. And so I want to block it from being accessed, but I do want people to be able to read it. So I can have a variable called number of beeps. And I go to the person class and I call the get count public method. I'm allowed to do this. And then I can print out like people created space. Beeps. I probably didn't even have to put it to a variable, but anyway. Oh, what did it do? Have to convert it to a string. Well, all right. So let's see. Okay, so let's see. Let's put another bracket here on the code. Okay. All right. So Mary speaks English. Jose speaks Spanish. Klaus speaks German. People created is 3. Okay. All right. People created is 3. All right. So so I have a class field count. I put double underscore in front of it. So that way you can't do this. I don't want somebody doing this. Person dot equals. I don't want this happening. Oh, it actually created. Yeah. All right. Never mind. That's a different field. It doesn't impact our count. It made a different variable for that class. So, all right. Anyway, so it won't impact our count field, but it actually successfully created another field. All right. So now let's see. The next thing we want to cover is, so suppose we wrote this up in class, in our lecture class. Suppose we created a class called translation. And the class has the objects of the class have no data fields to them, like a name or language. There's no information we're recording about them. All the class is a collection of methods that are available to the public for use. So what would that mean if we had a class called translation and it was just a bunch of functions and for people to use? What would happen? So let's just think about that while I'm creating a method. So suppose I wanted to have a method that greets somebody in their native language. So I would make a definition, I'd call it greeting, and I'd take as an input parameter. Now there's no objects, so there's no self, right? In this case, I'm just going to say language. And I'm going to say semicolon. And now I'm going to do this. I'm going to say if language double equals English, return. So how do you greet somebody in English? You say hello. Okay. And I could say okay, and let's say we did this. All right. Language is Spanish. And one of the students in class yesterday said, you say hello in German, H-A-L-L-O. Is that right? H-A-L-L-O. All right. Okay, good. So, okay. So what did I do here? I created a class called translation, which I'm really just making a collection of public functions that people can use in case they need to do some translation stuff. So now what I can do for each of my peeps, I can say, I could say greeting equals so I know the language. All right, so I'm going to call the greeting function, which is a public function. It doesn't have two underscores in front of it, so I'm allowed to call it, of the translation class. So how do I do that? So I'm going to say translation greeting, and I'm going to pass in the language that was gotten. So I'm going through all of my peeps, all my people. I'm getting their name and saving that in a variable. I'm getting the language they speak. I'm saving that in a variable. And now I'm going into my translation class, which is a collection of public functions, and I'm calling a function called greeting. And I'm passing in the language, whatever language they speak. Hopefully the greeting will be the way you greet a person in that language. So now I can say greeting Don't make any syntax errors. Let's see. Okay, so here's what we have going so far. I'm going through all my peeps, right? I got Mary speaks English. So I got Mary's name. I got Mary's language, English. I asked, how do I greet somebody in English? And this function told me if the language I pass in is English, you say hello. And then I took that greeting and I greeted Mary and I said, hello, Mary. Maybe I should say you speak English since I'm talking directly to Mary. Okay. All right, but you get the idea. Now, okay, suppose I wanted to, okay, so now suppose I want to add a fourth person. Suppose I did this, P4 equals person. So let's say Pierre. Pierre speaks. And I add Pierre to my array. But I haven't updated my greeting function to cover French. So what would happen if I did this? I get an error. I get an error because nothing was returned. All right. Okay. So that's a little. Let me make a quick adjustment here. This wasn't real. I didn't write this program I didn't write this method very well. What I should have done. So basically here I'm not returning anything, right? Because when I was going after Pierre, my greeting function returned nothing. It only returns if the parameter passed in is English, Spanish, or German, I return something. Otherwise, I don't return anything. So that's bad. It should always return something. So what would be a good way to rewrite this? Let's do it this way. Let's say greeting, say message equals hello. So in other words, if you give me a language that we've never heard of, I'm going to greet you in English. I'm going to like default to the English greeting. So now I can say French is your. All right. Yeah, I took French in high school. And so you say hello by saying good day in French. I remember asking my teacher, what if it's like a bad day out? It's like a hurricane. You still say good day. That's how you say hello. All right. So I've wait a minute. Not done yet. Language is Spanish message. Equals hello. So the variable message will definitely be set to something. If you come in with a language that we don't handle yet, so let's say you come in with, Portuguese. We don't have Portuguese, so you're getting hello in English. So basically you're getting hello unless this function has heard of your language, and then you'll get that language. Otherwise, you're going to get hello. So now I could say okay. So let's see. Okay, so now that we run that, we're going to get for Pierre speaks French. So we say bonjour, Pierre speaks French. Okay. So yeah, so like I said, this was just the way I wrote this I was using return all the time. I should actually set up a variable and then return that variable and guarantee that that variable will have some value. So, all right, so that's a default of hello. So you'll definitely get some greeting. It may be in English, even though you don't speak English, but at least it's better than an error, right? So that's better. All right, so now as far as our project is concerned, what you have to do in your assignment is you have to also say to the person something like, whatever day it is that the program is running, you would have to tell them what today is and what tomorrow is, what day of the week. So if you ran the program on a Wednesday and you were speaking to Jose, you'd say, hola, Jose, and then you have to say, today is Wednesday and tomorrow is Thursday in Spanish. So we're going to need another function that also is used in translations, and we'll call it something like upcoming. So again, you're going to pass in a language. And then we're going to say something like message equals. So I'll just type something that's not quite what you have to do in your assignment, but close enough today. And then that'll be the message. And then we can copy this. All right, so how do you say, okay. Oh, Morgan is how you say tomorrow in German. Yeah, I know someone named Morgan. Her name was tomorrow. So let's put that one here. And in Spanish. Mañana. And that goes over. All of this. Okay. Okay. All right. So now I'm saying greeting. Let's get rid of this speaks. So we're going to say we're going to call we're going to call this new function we just created called upcoming days. Space to make it look neat. Upcoming days. Upcoming days. Also passing in the language. You want to translate to that language. And then we're going to say greeting, hello. So we're going to say, we're going to greet the person, say their name, and then we're just going to say space, and then we'll say upcoming days. See if there's an error. Yep, of course there's an error. Okay, so I got a function upcoming days. Oh, because it's part of the translation class. Translation dot upcoming days. So in other words, I took, when we talked about functions earlier in the semester, you could just write functions all over the place, but I'm grouping them under a class called translation. So let's see if that fixes the problem. No, we have a new problem. Okay. Okay. Oh, I didn't return. How did I copy this? I think I returned something. Nothing got returned, and I'm trying to print it. All right, how about that? Okay. All right, so now what this program is doing, for each of my peeps, I'm saying hello, Mary, today and tomorrow in English. I'm saying hello, Jose, today and tomorrow in Spanish. Hello, Klaus, today and tomorrow in German. Bonjour, Pierre, and then however you say today and tomorrow in German. And I'm counting up how many people, and I'm printing that out in English. Okay, so for your assignment, you have to alter this program, the upcoming days. It shouldn't say today and tomorrow. It should figure out what day it is that you're running the program. So if you ran the program on a Wednesday and you're talking to Jose, it should say, hola, Jose. And then it should say today is Wednesday and tomorrow is Thursday. Now, in order for you to do that, you would have to call Python supplies a class of date and time functions. So they created a class. They have a class, date and time functions. And then there are a bunch of functions that are commonly used by programmers like you. And one of them is called, I think it's called day of week. But you just Google it and you'll find the name of it. And it'll tell you numerically what the day of the week is, a number between 0 and 6. And then what you have to do is take that number and find out how to say, 0 is Monday and 1 is Tuesday and 2 is Wednesday. So, you could create an array of the names of the week in every language. So you'll want to do an overhaul of this function upcoming days, and then print those out. And let's see, is there anything interesting else that we could add to this? So let me do this. Let me pause for a second and draw a picture of really what's going on here. Okay, so I just took a little break and I created an Excel spreadsheet. I'll make my video a little bit bigger. All right. So I got my Seton Hall t-shirt on. That's where Tony Soprano went to college for a semester and a half. All right. So I kind of just drew this out on Excel, what our memory looks like. So we have a class called person, and P1 was a person object, and it has two fields in it, underscore, underscore name, underscore, underscore language. And the fields we initialize to Mary in English. In addition to that, it has three methods, init, get name, and get language. Okay. So these are individual objects, chunks of storage with data filled in, and then methods that can operate on that data. But in addition to that, the class, the person, has a variable underscore underscore count, which equaled 4 because we created 4 people. So nowhere in this class object for Mary, nowhere does the field count show up, because the field count is tied to the class. So I kind of drew the class over here. So there's no individual field called count under Mary or Klaus or Pierre or Jose. And our translation class is just a class with no data. So I made the data fields, I gave the names in green and the actual data in white. I don't know if that makes sense to you. But basically the translation class is just a collection of public functions. We never actually create a translation object. It's just packaged into a class so that we could have these functions for people to use. And so the idea behind it's a little bit strange with this underscore idea in front of the names of the methods and the variables. So I just want to, this is kind of a little historical thing, but in languages like Java, which is what this code is, and C++, it's extremely similar. Here's how we would define the same exact person class in that language. And it's a little bit more spelled out. So for example, we would have, so when you create a class, you have to decide if it's available to the public or if it's kept private, meaning it can't be accessed by the public. So we would say public class person. Then for each individual field, we have language and name. We would decide, is it accessible from the program or should it be hidden and a public method would allow people to have access to it? So we would instead put the word private in front of it, a whole word in front of the variable. In Python and in Java and C++, before you use a variable, you have to say its type. This is not required in Python. So in Java, I would want to have a private string variable called name. Then I got to say semicolon at the end of every line. Every line of code, you have to say semicolon in Java and C++. So then I'd say private string language. Now, if I wanted to have a variable that is not in each object, but one that is just shared by the entire class, like count, I would use the word static with a small s. So I'd say there's a private field. So I don't want people writing, changing the variables. They can only call a public method to read it, but they're not allowed to willy-nilly edit it. I would say private static. Static means it belongs to the class, not to each individual object. And then I would create what's called a constructor method, the method that you call when you're constructing the object. And instead of it being called underscore init, like in Python, it's a public method and it's the name of the class. The class is named person, so the constructor is named person. So I can call this method and it will initialize these fields. Now I can't write to these fields name and language directly because I declared them as private, but I can call a public method person and create a public object. And then if I want to read the name, right, I would say I have a method, which is a public method. It's available to the public. It returns a value of type string. So in C++ and Java, you have to, if you write a function and it returns a result, you have to say the type of what it returns. Not required in Python. So I'm saying this is a public method. It returns a string. The name of the method is get method. It has no parameters. And it returns a name field. Same thing for the get language method. Now, if I want to call a function that returns a static variable count, static meaning there's one for the entire class, not one for each object created by the class, I would have to actually call that a static method. So, what's new in Python when it comes to handling public and private cases, instead of using the word public and private to determine that a variable or a method is public, has public access, or if it's hidden. Instead of putting that before the variable name, we incorporate into the variable's name the two underscores. So underscore underscore name means it's a name field and it's private. But if I called it just name, then it would be name public. And so it's a little getting used to for someone who's programmed in C++ or Java to take the idea of private, this name private, and the variable name, and combine the two together in the variable's name. The one upside to this is this. Suppose down the road, I'm using a variable in a method. And let's say this class got very, very big, and there's tons and tons of methods. And I'm looking at a variable name, and I'm trying to wonder, is this thing public or private? I'd have to go searching for where it was originally declared to know what it is, because I only know the variable's name. And I don't know when it was originally declared, was it public or private? This idea in Python where part of the name tells me whether it's public or private is a good idea. It's a good idea in that way, but it's very strange looking at variable names. They look ugly, right? Underscore underscore name is the name of a variable. It's an ugly looking name, but it's telling me it's a variable name called name, and it's letting me know it's private, so I can't access it from the outside world. So that's one advantage. So the only reason I'm bringing up Java or C++ is what's the hardest part about this is really understanding the concept of what a class is. How different what syntax different languages use doesn't really, mean a whole lot. So whether they do it one way or the other, it really doesn't matter. It's the ideas that we're trying to get across. And so that's the only reason I'm doing that. And I think that Java and C++ spell out everything. They make you type a lot, right? And so Python, you type less. Instead of typing out the word private space and then the type and then space and the variable name, here we're just saying underscore underscore variable name. So that's good. That's an advantage. All right, so yeah, this is like kind of a lab lecture that goes along with our classroom lecture. And okay, so